Disclaimer: viewer discretion is advised. This video features sexualized animals. Features is not the right word, but you know what I mean. This video talks about sex, fetishism, pornography, all that stuff. So if you're not comfortable with it, then go watch this instead. Furries! Love them? Hate them? Indifferent? No matter what your opinion of them is, and no matter if you are one or not, you have to admit that from the outside looking in, the furry community is different. But I mean, that can be said of most subcultures. But many people, both in this subculture and outside of it, all wonder, why? Why does this particular subculture exist? What's going on in the psyche of its members to make them feel this way towards anthropomorphized animals? And I'm being serious. This is in no way a joke. This is a factual and in-depth look at why being furry is a thing. No, really. Really serious. I mean, no offense to anyone. And if I offend anyone, well, I'm sorry, that wasn't my intent. You need to grow thicker skin. First, I gotta say, finding reliable sources based on facts rather than the opinions of overly concerned conservative housewives was very challenging. More challenging than you'd think. And you probably think it's challenging already, don't you? Furries get a lot of hate, and a lot of spread misinformation about them. Think gamers on mainstream news, especially Fox News. Think that. Only more. So before we go into the why, or the how, we first need to know what exactly it is we're talking about. The term furry can apply to both the anthropomorphized animals found in media themselves, but it can also refer to the real-world individuals who are huge fans of them, dress up like them, etc. And speaking of media furries, you could say that it all started in ancient Egypt with their gods. You could say that, but I'm not going to, because that's silly. Furries, of both types, are actually fairly modern. It wasn't until the 20th century that comics and cartoons would start depicting animals as characters, and eventually anthropomorphized ones. The intent was never to appeal to real-world furries, because for the most part, they didn't exist yet. The reason the artists chose animals instead of people is because animals are a lot more appealing to their target audience, young children. And it also helped differ their media from others, making it more memorable. Hey, do you remember that one game? What's it called? It has the dude with short brown hair and stubble, and he's an action star, and he's like in his mid-30s. I'm trying to think. Let's see. I don't... Oh, what was that one game with the fox that flew planes?
Oh, Star Fox!
Do you remember that game with there's a fast fox and a fast hedgehog? And he's blue.
Do you mean Sonic the Hedgehog?
What's that one stealth game with a raccoon and a turtle?
Oh, Sly Cooper.
Do you remember that one cartoon? It had anthropomorphic cats that were super, lightning cats or something?
Thundercats?
Thundercats! We could have just a bunch of shows and games with similar art styles and only humans, but then everything starts looking samey, generic, less memorable. There are only so many combinations of human you can come up with, but throwing in animals, that gives you a lot more options at keeping your characters more original and memorable. Plus, it's more aesthetically intriguing to children. The brighter colors and the zigzags of the fur, and the vast differences in face shape. You can even make more varied merchandise of these cartoon characters, because really, that's what old cartoons were. They were nothing but a marketing ploy. Sell advertising space and merchandise. Kids were growing up with this, and they loved it, which makes sense given that children were the target audience. Until the likes of Fritz the Cat. Fritz the Cat took anthropomorphized animals and put them in the mid of the sexual revolution, the late 60s and early 70s. It was a cartoon for adults, and I don't mean the kind of adult cartoons as in the things you find on Adult Swim on Cartoon Network. No, I mean it was for adults. There's sex and racism and classism and deep meaning and sex everywhere. And this depiction of anthropomorphized animals didn't stop there. In the early 80s, the Bizarre Sex series, which was a series of erotica, had an issue featuring anthropomorphized cats. While anthropomorphized animals in the adult world was a rarity, when it came to children's media, it just wouldn't stop growing. And by the mid-90s, most cartoons featured anthropomorphized animals. At this point in time, furries did begin to pop up here and there, but they were very spread out, and would only really meet at sci-fi conventions and comic-cons. It wasn't until 1989 that the first full-on furry convention was held. But then came the aughts. The birth of the internet. Mainstream, and the internet's been around for a while, but the birth of the mainstream internet. And thus, the furry revolution began. With this furry revolution, more furries came to realize that they weren't as alone in their feelings as they thought they were. There are plethoras of others that share their interests. So they began sharing their artwork and organized even more and bigger social gatherings. So now you know why furries exist in media and the history of human furries, which, again, are just people who really happen to like this art style, this anthropomorphized animal choice. Most people tend to grow out of it by the time they reach an adult age. Others don't. Nothing wrong with that. And others grow into it. Some really into it. I mean, really into it. I'm talking about furry fetishism now. The sexualization of anthropomorphized animals. But whoa. I'm not saying all furries do this. That is a misconception. Let's cover some misconceptions. One of the biggest misconceptions that people have when a furry tells them of their furriness is that, well, let's just say they assume you spend most of your time on DeviantArt with the adult filter off. But is that a fair assumption? Well, let's look at the numbers, which, by the way, are the averages of a plethora of studies taken at furry conventions. So, that's as specific of a survey as you can get. According to the stereotype, all furries feel sexual attraction to anthropomorphized animals, but the fact is, only 37% say they do. 38% have mixed feelings and are more neutral, and the remaining 24% said they have no sexual attraction. They like furries for the design aspect, the community, or other reasons. Getting a little more into it, one study in 2008 found that just under 17% of furries were actually interested in zoophilia. Zoophilia meaning they actually want to have sexual relations with not just an anthropomorphized animal, but full-on your cat. This has its own set of morality that I'm not even going to bother getting into, but it does show that the stereotype that all furries want to have sex with animals is blatantly wrong. There is one stereotype that does hold a little bit of truth, however, and that's that furries tend to lean a little more onto the homosexual side of things. Now, of course it's not true as a blanket statement. Blanket statements are never true. But let's look at the numbers. In the US, about 1.8% of people are bisexual and 1.7% homosexual. And these studies at these furry conventions show that these sexualities are overrepresented within this fandom. Averaging out the results shows that 23% of furries are homosexual, 41% are bisexual, and 32% are heterosexual. And 4% are other. But in the end, the misconceptions found in media about furries is that they all wear fursuits, go to these furry conventions to do sex things with other people of the same gender and animals. And that's simply not true, for the most part. So now that that's all out of the way, let's talk about why you clicked on this video in the first place. To find out why people are furries. How do they become this way? Well, I'll just say it again. For that 24+% that doesn't feel any sexual feelings towards them, they're just in it for the design aspect. They happen to really like the idea of anthropomorphized animals. And they like participating in the community. But let's be honest now. Most of you probably clicked this video to find out about that other 37+%. How do people find anthropomorphized animals sexy? And that is a question that is a lot more tricky to answer. How do humans that are supposed to find things like this, this, there we go, find themselves attracted to this as well? Well, there is one word that summarizes it all very well. Fetish. The sexualization of things that are not inherently sexual. There is nothing sexual about feet, yet it is the most common fetish in the world. Teachers? Latex? These are all non-sexual things that a lot of people find sexually attractive. So it's a fetish. Anthropomorphized animals, or furries, fall into this category too. They are not inherently human sexualized organs. Yet, just like feet, underwear, and nuns, many people do. So to understand the furry fetish and how it develops in someone, we first need to understand how fetishes in general develop. And being that this involves the long-term development of psychological and neurological sides of your persona, it's very complicated. Complicated, and no one knows exactly why we do. But there are some good theories. The theory that makes the most sense to me when taking furries into context is this one. Fetishes begin developing in your childhood, usually before or just as puberty starts. And some event or string of events causes your still developing brain to make certain connections. As you begin to feel sexual feelings for the first time, certain things may leave imprints on your mind. Contexts that this thing means sex, sex makes you happy, so this thing makes you happy. Maybe it would be best if I explained with an example. Let's say a young boy has an older sister in her teens. Over the years, he's seen her go through puberty and become a young woman, and an attractive one at that. He sees many things, like her trips to and from the shower, or her underwear on the floor. At first, he's too young to really think much of it, but eventually, as his sexual side starts developing, his sister becomes the only thing that he really understands as sexually attractive. And he may wind up with an incest fetish. Or remember when I mentioned her underwear on the floor? In combination of that and the Victoria's Secret posters all over the inside of the mall, he may make the connection that the reason these images are arousing is not because of the mostly naked women on them. After all, he's seen fully naked women before and felt nothing, because that was before puberty kicked in. So it must be because of the lingerie. And thus, a lingerie fetish may develop, all because his developing brain made that connection. Think back to the first time you saw a naked or mostly naked person of the opposite sex, and it actually mattered to you. Or perhaps even the first time you felt this new feeling of arousal. A lot of people can remember that moment in their childhood for a long time, perhaps even for life. So given whatever the context was at that moment, could potentially leave behind an ingrained thought or context that becomes a key part in your sexuality. But now I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, but Lockstin, wouldn't that mean most people would have odd fetishes then? And good question. The example I gave was very specific. Some people might not even discover their sexual side until they've already developed it a little bit. Or they discovered these feelings in a more traditional way. No special context at all. Just, oh hey, I find these sexually attractive people to be sexually attractive. Go figure. Plus, all of our brains are built a little differently and develop in different ways, different orders, make different connections. And some formations are more likely to make fetishized contexts than others. Going off on a tangent now, some of you may have seen my video about how Super Smash Bros. Is all in the imagination of a child with autism. At one point I mentioned that this boy may have developed a furry fetish. I brought this up because basically, those with autism have a different brain structure and thus learn differently, and cling to certain things much more than the neurotypical population. This leads to those with autism to be much more likely to have a fetish, and these individuals are also more likely to get really into certain things they enjoy in early childhood, commonly cartoons, and video games, and they will continue to be super into them later in life. With the combination of being more likely to be really into cartoons, especially those targeted at children, thus with animals, and being more likely to develop fetishes, it's safe to say that those with autism are more likely to develop a furry fetish. But not as high as you'd think. Furries are so autistic is something a lot of people on the internet say. That is another misconception. So now let's look at the numbers and get the facts. Truth is, all these surveys I used earlier also found that compared to the general population, furries do have a heightened number of those with autism, but not nearly as much as people assume. So in the general population, 1.4 to 1.6% of people are somewhere on the autistic spectrum, whereas if you look at furries, about 4% of them are. So yes, furries are more than twice as likely to have autism as the general population, but still only 4%. That is very small. And now we will leave that tangent and answer the main question at hand. Though, taking everything I've said into context, the answer should be somewhat clear. Children like these designs because they are colorful and unique, and some simply don't grow out of it, just like comics and video games. And as you grow older, you happen to notice your sexual feelings while you are playing or watching some sort of anthropomorphized media. So let's say you watched Space Jam. You know.
Hey.
Hi, my name is Lola Bunny.
You want to play a little one-on-one, doll?
Doll?
Uh-huh.
On the court.
Yes.
Don't ever call me doll.
Chance.
Hey, nice playing with you.
Having never felt sexual feelings before, and then all of a sudden, Lola Bunny gives you this happy sensation, your brain makes the context that animated bunny lady equals sexy, or video game bat lady cleavage is nice. And that's just the beginning. That's just what made the context. Now with the context ingrained into the brain wants more. Sexual arousal releases dopamine in the brain. Dopamine is like a natural drug. Animated bunny lady equals dopamine release, and it wants more dopamine. You start looking at more animated bunnies. You start drawing sexy animals, search the web for sexy animals, and as you grow older, you find a self-building up community surrounding it, which also makes you happy, which releases more dopamine. And of course, your feelings into these characters grows as well. And remember how I said that anthropomorphized animals are more aesthetically intriguing to children because they are much more interesting than humans? Now throw sex into the mix. Sex makes everything more complicated. And by sex, of course, I mean porn. Humans, again, only have so many shapes and colors. But furry porn has unlimited potential, and it eventually becomes the #1 thing you've searched on Google Images. That is, of course, if you are a furry and are one of the 37% that actually find it sexually intriguing. So, furries! Now you know more about them, and possibly more about yourself. From the inside, it's a welcoming community. And online, these individuals love coming together and sharing their art, talking about their passions, and not being tied to the physical manifestation that is real-world limitations. And really, that's what a lot of geekier subcultures do anyway. A little weird, but aren't we all? Stay awesome, everyone. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end and for being patient with this video's release. Please tell me what you think down below, and remember, this was not intended to be offensive. My intent is to be fair and honest, and to educate. And if you like fairness, honesty, and education, consider subscribing or supporting Gnoggin on Patreon. It helps me focus on getting videos out sooner. And I'd like to give a big thank you to Leet1, Noggin's current Patreon sponsor. You can find him on DeviantArt if you'd like. So, until next time, never, never stop using your heads.